A team of surgeons cut open the clogged arteries of people who had died from heart attacks and found something hiding inside the plaque that nobody expected. It was not just cholesterol, and it was not just calcium. It was fragments of bacteria that belong in the gut, not in the bloodstream, and certainly not cemented inside the walls of a human heart. Those fragments were found in every single disease artery they examined, yet when they checked healthy arteries from the exact same patients, arteries with no blockages, there was absolutely no trace of bacterial material anywhere. That discovery forced researchers to ask a question that changed the direction of cardiovascular science. What if heart disease does not just start in the heart? What if it starts in the stomach? I am going to walk you through exactly what the science says, and more importantly, I'm going to give you specific research-backed solutions that can begin reversing this damage. If you stay with me to the end, this video has the potential to change the rest of your life, because what you're about to learn is something most people will never hear from their doctor. Your digestive tract is lined with a barrier that is only one cell thick. One single layer of cells is the only thing standing between the contents of your intestines, which include trillions of bacteria, waste products, and undigested food, and your clean bloodstream. Those cells are held together by structures called tight junctions, and when those junctions are intact, the system works beautifully because nutrients pass through while everything else stays locked inside where it belongs. But when those junctions weaken, and they weaken from processed food, excess sugar, chronic stress, long-term antacid use, antibiotic exposure, and simple aging, gaps form and bacterial fragments called lipopolysaccharides slip through into your blood. Your immune system treats this like an invasion, and inflammatory alarms fire across your entire body. This is not the kind of inflammation you can see, like a bruised knee, but rather a silent, invisible chronic inflammation that runs through your veins 24 hours a day without producing a single symptom you would notice. Here is where your heart gets destroyed. When those bacterial toxins reach your arteries, they latch onto receptors on the cells lining your blood vessel walls and trigger a chain reaction. The vessel lining becomes inflamed and sticky, white blood cells rush in, and LDL cholesterol gets trapped in the inflamed tissue, where it undergoes chemical changes that make it far more dangerous than it was floating freely in your blood. This is how plaque forms. But the damage goes further because these same gut-derived toxins destabilize plaque that already exists, thinning its protective cap, enlarging the dead core inside it, and attracting even more inflammatory cells until the plaque becomes so fragile that it ruptures. When plaque ruptures, a blood clot forms on the spot and blocks the artery, and that is a heart attack or a stroke whose trigger was not stress, not exercise, and not genetics, but a leaking gut. There is a second pathway, and this one comes from what your gut bacteria do with certain foods. When you eat red meat, your gut bacteria break down nutrients in it called choline and carnitine and produce a compound called trimethylamine, which your liver converts into TMAO. Cleveland Clinic researcher Stanley Hazen tracked nearly 12,000 healthy people over 16 years, measuring their TMAO levels more than 20,000 times, and found that elevated TMAO independently predicted who would develop heart failure regardless of their age, weight, blood pressure, or cholesterol. A separate study found that eating one daily serving of red meat tripled TMAO levels compared to eating white meat or plant-based protein. And what TMAO does is accelerate plaque buildup, promote dangerous blood clotting, and stiffen arteries. Your gut bacteria are literally manufacturing a heart disease accelerant from the food on your plate. There is even a third compound that researchers at the Cleveland Clinic identified, a gut-produced molecule called PAGLN that comes from bacteria breaking down an amino acid in protein-rich foods. High PAGLN levels made platelets, the tiny cells that form blood clots, hyperreactive, and people with elevated PAGLN had significantly higher rates of heart attack, stroke, and death independent of every traditional risk factor. So your gut is not only building plaque in your arteries, but simultaneously making your blood itself more likely to clot. Now let me connect this to something almost every person watching this has experienced. Constipation. A study of over 540,000 hospital patients aged 60 and older found that constipation alone raised the risk of cardiovascular events by 58%. And when constipation was combined with high blood pressure, the risk of heart attacks and strokes jumped by an additional 34%. The straining involved in constipation has been measured to spike blood pressure by as much as 70 millimeters of mercury in a single moment. And for someone with weakened arteries and fragile plaque, that kind of sudden pressure surge is exactly the trigger that causes a catastrophic event. Constipation also promotes bacterial overgrowth and gut dysbiosis, which feeds the entire leaky gut to heart disease cycle I just described, making it a measurable cardiac risk factor sitting in published research that almost nobody talks about. Acid reflux connects to this as well. A cause and effect study using genetic analysis found that gastroesophageal reflux disease causally increases the risk of atrial fibrillation, an irregular heart rhythm that multiplies stroke risk by 5. Bloating, gas, and irregular bowel habits all point toward the same underlying problem, which is a gut microbiome that is out of balance, leaking toxins and silently inflaming your cardiovascular system. A study in the European Heart Journal examined over 600 people and found that the diversity of gut bacteria was inversely linked to arterial stiffness, meaning the less diverse the gut, the harder and more damaged the arteries. Gut microbiome factors explain more of the variation in arterial stiffness than insulin resistance and belly fat combine, and the specific bacteria linked to healthier, more flexible arteries were the ones that produce butyrate from dietary fiber. The vicious cycle that makes this so dangerous works in both directions. Poor digestion damages the gut lining. The damaged lining leaks toxins. Toxins inflame the arteries, and inflamed arteries lead to heart disease. But heart disease damages the gut right back because a weakened heart cannot pump blood efficiently, so fluid backs up into the veins supplying the intestines, causing the bowel wall to swell, further destroying the barrier and allowing even more toxins to leak through. Researchers call it the gut-heart axis, and once it starts spinning, it accelerates in both directions simultaneously. Now here's what you came for, the solutions. And these are not vague suggestions, but specific, evidence-backed interventions that target the exact mechanisms I just explained, some of which can start producing measurable changes within days. The first and most powerful solution is a compound your own body can manufacture for free, but only if you give it the right raw materials. That compound is butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid produced when beneficial gut bacteria ferment fiber. Butyrate physically repairs the tight junctions that hold your gut lining together, sealing the gaps that let toxins through, while simultaneously reducing inflammation at the source. Research published by the American Heart Association showed butyrate directly lowers blood pressure and reduces heart rate. The way you produce butyrate is by eating fiber from whole foods because the fermentation process itself is what creates it. And the most effective butyrate producing foods based on the research are lentils, chickpeas, black beans, oats, barley, apples with the skin on, slightly underripe bananas, garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, and artichokes. If you're not eating any of these right now and you start including just 2 servings a day, within 1 to 2 weeks your butyrate producing bacteria begin to multiply and your gut lining starts to repair. A meta-analysis published in the BMJ found that each additional 7 grams of fiber per day reduced the risk of coronary heart disease by 9%, which means roughly 1 cup of lentils is making a measurable dent in your cardiac risk. The second solution targets TMAO directly. Since TMAO is produced when gut bacteria digest red meat, reducing red meat to once or twice a week and replacing it with fatty fish like salmon, sardines, or mackerel creates a double effect where your gut produces dramatically less TMAO, while the omega-3 fatty acids in the fish actively reduce both gut and arterial inflammation. If you do not like fish Walnuts and ground flaxseed provide plant-based omega-3s that still support the same anti-inflammatory pathways. The third solution is fermented foods, and the evidence here is extraordinary. Stanford University ran a 10-week clinical trial published in Cell and found that people who added fermented foods to their daily diet, plain yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, or kimchi, increased their gut microbial diversity and dropped 19 inflammatory proteins in their blood, including interleukin-6, one of the most dangerous drivers of arterial plaque instability. A high-fiber diet tested in the same study did not lower these inflammatory markers, and only the fermented foods achieved that result. 1 cup of plain yogurt or kefir daily is enough to start this process, and kefir is the stronger option because it contains roughly 3 times more probiotic strains than yogurt. The bacteria from fermented foods do not permanently colonize your gut, which is why daily consistency is what keeps the supply active and working. The fourth solution addresses constipation as a cardiac strategy rather than just a comfort issue. Beyond the fiber already mentioned, magnesium citrate taken in modest doses helps draw water into the intestines and promotes regular motility without the harsh effects of stimulant laxatives. Physical movement, even a 10-minute walk after meals, stimulates the gut's natural contracting rhythm, and adequate water intake, which most people over 60 underestimate, keeps fiber functional because dry fiber without water makes constipation worse rather than better. The goal is a daily bowel movement without straining, because straining is a documented cardiovascular trigger that can spike blood pressure dangerously in people with fragile arteries. The fifth solution is the elimination of gut barrier destroyers. Excess sugar feeds the exact bacterial species that produce the most lipopolysaccharides. Processed foods contain emulsifiers that animal studies have shown directly erode the protective mucus layer of the intestine, and prolonged use of proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux alters the bacterial balance throughout the entire digestive tract. If you are on a PPI, do not stop it on your own, but have the conversation with your doctor about whether you still need it, because the long-term gut consequences are now well documented. The sixth solution, and one almost nobody talks about, is maintaining a 3-hour gap between your last meal and bedtime. When you eat close to sleep, your digestive system is still processing food during the time your body should be in repair mode, which extends the window during which inflammatory metabolites are being produced and absorbed, while also worsening acid reflux that is now causally linked to atrial fibrillation. Finishing your last meal at least 3 hours before you lie down allows digestion to complete, reduces overnight inflammatory load, and protects both your gut lining and your heart rhythm while you sleep. Nothing I have shared means you should stop any medication your doctor has prescribed, because blood pressure medication, statins, and blood thinners are managing damage that has already occurred, and they are keeping you safe. What these dietary changes do is address the upstream cause, the gut dysfunction that likely contributed to the damage in the first place. And as your inflammation drops and your numbers improve over the coming weeks and months, your doctor may choose to adjust your medications on their own terms. Everything in this video comes from published research out of the Cleveland Clinic, Stanford, Harvard, the American Heart Association, the European Heart Journal, and the National Institutes of Health. This is the direction medicine is heading, and the tools to act on it are already in your kitchen. If this changed how you understand the connection between your stomach and your heart, subscribe to this channel, because the next video goes deeper into one specific food that clinical trials show can transform your gut health in just 30 days, and you will not want to miss what the research found.